So, 80 billion, or actually more than 80 billion, this is the amount of land animals killed every year for human consumption. Now, if we add aquatic animals, then we are even talking about trillions. These numbers represent not only a devastating effect on the environment, but also an inexplicable level of suffering, cruelty, and I believe also injustice for the animals involved. This is why I'd like to see a shift towards a vegan world, and why I spent the past 18 months or so by now trying to find the best communication strategies to achieve that goal. And with this, I'd like to welcome you to my presentation with threats towards a vegan world. What kind of threats I'm talking about, I will get into this in a bit, but first I'd like to introduce to you Abby and Nebe. Abby and Nebe are two animal rights activists who share the goal of a vegan world, but their approaches differ. Abby is an abolitionist animal rights activist, and Nebe a new welfarist one. So what does that mean? Abby uses logical arguments, and she demands a complete and immediate cessation of all animal use. Whereas Nebe, she uses psychological strategies, and she has a bit more of a peeling the onion type of approach. So now the results. So my first hypothesis was that Abby should elicit stronger reactions, and this should be true for both aggression rejection and reparation. And this is what I found. Now this is aggression and rejection. Now these are post minus pre different scores. So 0 means no change, above 0 means an increase, and below 0 means a decrease in comparison to the pretest. So here, as expected, Abby elicited significantly more vegophobia and marginally more rejection of vegan products. And there was no effect on speciesism. Then reparation. Now this is contrary to my expectations. So here, Nebe elicited marginally more reduction intentions, and unfortunately there was no effect on any of the other reparation variables. So to summarize, as expected, Abby triggered more vegophobia, more rejection of vegan products. So this hypothesis is confirmed. And then I had an effect in the opposite direction for reduction intent, and no effects on the other variables. So now the question is, what explains these effects? And my hypothesis was that the effect of strategy on aggression rejection should be serially explained by right south and worldview threat and anger, and the effect on reduction intent should be serially explained by morality threat and guilt. So what did I find? Now this is vegophobia, and this is again my expectations. Now these are my findings. So I did find the serial mediation via right threat and anger, and I also found an indirect effect via worldview threat that was, however, missing the expected link with anger. And I found an additional indirect effect via anger that was unaccounted for by any of the threat categories. Now rejection, these are again my expectations and my findings. So again, I found the serial mediation via right threat and anger, and the additional indirect effect via anger. Now reduction intent, this is my expectation, which I did not find. Instead, I found again an indirect effect via right threat. So to summarize that, this was my expectation, and I did find the serial mediation via right threat and anger. I also found an indirect effect via worldview threat that was, however, missing the expected anger link. And I did not find the mediation via world threat, and instead I found another indirect effect via anger. Now this was my expectation for reduction intent, which I did not find. Instead I found this, again, an indirect effect via rights threat, which meant that Abby elicited more rights threat, which then had an unfavorable effect on reduction intent. So it seems that rights threat plays a central role in this. It explains all three of my main effects. So far, we can conclude that Nebe seems to be the better option, because mainly she elicits less rights threat, also less worldview threat and less anger, which then leads to less aggression and rejection. and also seems to have a slightly favorable effect on reparation, specifically reduction in tensions. Now, my next question was, is EBI actually ever the better choice? And I conducted several exploratory analyses to answer that question. And what I found was that worldview threat actually moderated the effect of strategy on many variables of the reparation pathway. So the first one is morality threat, which, as I said, is an awareness of injustice. And as you can see here, when worldview threat is high, then EBI actually had a counterproductive effect, as indicated by means and confidence intervals below 0. However, when worldview threat was low, then EBI actually had a superior effect to Nebel. And I found a very similar pattern of means for elimination intent. And then for elimination and reduction effort, I also found that when worldview threat was high, then EBI had a counterproductive effect. But when worldview threat was low, then EBI performed as well as Nebel. So we can answer the question, yes, there seem to be instances when EBI is the better choice, and this is the case when worldview threat is low. Then she performs as well or even superior to Nebel. So we can add this here. There is actually an effect of strategy on the reparation pathway, but the direction depends on the level of worldview threat. And when worldview threat is high, then Nebel performs better, mainly in terms of damage control, but when worldview threat is low, then EBI is or performs as well or even better. So to answer the initial question, can we reach a vegan world with threats? I believe we can get at least a little bit closer to that goal by keeping rights and worldview threats as low as possible. And some suggestions of how we can achieve that is maybe, first of all, to use autonomy supportive language, so to emphasize people's free will and choice in our communication. And to keep worldview threat low, maybe we should introduce radical vegan, especially abolitionist worldviews in a stepwise manner. And then when we realize, okay, we are met with resistance here, maybe tune it down a notch and switch to a less radical communication style, such as Nebel's, mainly in order to prevent counterproductive effects. So I had some limitations, and I also have some ideas for future directions. First of all, I used the serial mediation model, so the causality is not always 100% clear. Then the chatbots had some problems. I had some technical disruptions, and the bots didn't always follow the prompts 100%. The comparability between AI and human communicators is questionable, but this is something that future work could look into. And also future work could maybe look into explanations for the effect of strategy on anger that was unaccounted for by the threat categories I tested for. And I have an idea what might explain at least part of this effect, and this is anticipated moral reproach, like an anticipated negative judgment for vegan, and I'm also happy to elaborate on this during the Q&A, but considering the time, I will conclude my presentation at this point. EBI and Nebel will keep advocating for a vegan world, and you're welcome to follow us on Instagram. And also, most importantly, I'd like to express my special gratitude to Professor Jonas for giving me the opportunity to conduct this research. It meant so much to me. Of course, to Johannes for all your support and advice throughout the project, and Dr. Ulhedeke for taking the time to be my discussant here today, Stefan for helping with organizing everything, and everyone else present in the audience for your interest in my work. Thank you so much. And Selena, thank you so much for your encouraging words today in the morning. Thank you.